Here's some food for thought, something that will sound familiar to all of us. It's 10 at night. You're about to sleep. You've had a long day, but instead of just calling it a night, you turn to your smartphone or your tablet. You start with WhatsApp, check your emails, maybe do some online shopping. And then you turn to Instagram or Facebook. And that's when you begin scrolling endlessly, mindlessly, trends, reels, videos, memes, and of course, an endless stream of negative news. Your brain just refuses to switch off. There's now a term for it, doomscrolling. Spinning continuously through bad news. There's been enough of it over the last 2 years after all. From the pandemic, to job losses, to the Afghanistan conflict, and now the Russia-Ukraine war. Despite its effect on our mental health, research now says it's leading to anxiety and depression even. So what's the way out of this? Are we all doomed to keep scrolling? How much news is too much news? What impact does all this have on our mental well-being? On this special broadcast with me, Priyanka Sharma, I'd like to welcome our guests for the hour. We are now being joined by Sharon Blady, who is a former health minister. She joins us now from Winnipeg in Canada. Thanks so much for joining us. Also joining us is Dr. Shabbir Tejani, who is a GP partner at the Groby Road Medical Centre from Leicester in the United Kingdom. I welcome both of you and thanks so much for giving us your precious time on WION World is One. Sharon, I'd like to take my first question from you. Let's talk about this term that has become even more important in light of the Ukraine conflict. Research shows that doom scrolling has now seen an uptick. We're now consuming more news about the Ukraine war. And what kind of impact, in your view, is it having on our mental health, or the word used more often than not, on our mood?
Oh, it's having a very strong impact. And I think it's one of those things that because this is an event that has global implications, it reaches farther than a lot of times. We often have news cycles where people will take interest in something and an issue will drop back. This is one that's keeping people focused and they are seeking more and more information. And what's interesting is that we usually tend to seek information out of a sense of protection. It's about keeping ourselves safe. And what happens is we can literally overdose on this. And that's what's happening, is it's upping anxiety levels. And it's also impacting our health, our well-being in a variety of ways, disrupting our sleep. And so it's one of those things that we really need to, take a break from. And I know that it's, we're all attached to our phones, but it's something that in our own best interests, we do have to exactly do that. Modify how much we use and recognize that things aren't going to change because of our access to the phone, so that it's best for us to actually step away.
Dr. Tejani, I want to come to you now. What's your opinion on this? Is it possible for us? We're addicted to our phones, something that Sharon has just pointed out. We're addicted to our phones. We use it to shop online, to manage our day. And then now we're consuming it we're now using the phone essentially to consume our daily quota of news. And most of it is negative. What kind of impact does it have on our mental health being?
Absolutely. I mean, if you go even further back, you can see that the advent of the smartphone and that integration with social media has caused an explosion in the number of cases we've had of mental health disorders, especially depression and anxiety. And there's several reasons for it. It's very variable. I mean, you can look at things like the effect it has on sleep cycles, the effect it has on social interaction. We know that, increased social interaction reduces levels of anxiety and depression. So people are tending to keep themselves away from other people and spending more time on their phones. They are spending time on their phones and on screens instead of going to sleep. And that is having a massive implication on mental health. As to what we can do about it, I think, it really comes down to the individual to try and restrict their screen time, to try and make sure that they do more things in order to improve their mental well-being. And also with the COVID pandemic, we've had less social interaction, which has meant that we've had to spend our time doing other things. And unfortunately, people just pick up their smartphones and scroll through Facebook, WhatsApp, and other social medias.
Absolutely. I want to sort of broaden our discussion at this point, and my next question will be to both of you. You just mentioned the pandemic. We've seen lockdowns imposed globally, and we all turned to social media as a way of surviving, for information, to connect with people across the world. We were making coffee, we were baking banana bread, and social media, in a sense, became our savior during the pandemic. But now we're seeing the flip side of that, where we're using social media to consume anything anything and everything. So is there anything that governments can do to modify that? I want to start by asking you, Sharon, this question, given your expertise in the matter. What can we do to sort of see and monitor what are we consuming and how are we consuming it?
Well, I think one thing to remember is that our phones, social media, all of these things are tools. And to also keep in mind the idea that tools are inherently neutral. So yes, we could do all of these wonderful positive things, but there's other things that come in, and that while the information is useful, going back even further, one of the upticks in terms of the impact of constant news was when we saw the move to 24-hour news cycles. It was the same kind of thing happening, and now we're seeing a resurgence, or I guess you'd say an escalation of that. So it's keeping in mind everything in moderation. Give yourself set limits. Try to recognize what are you doing for your tools, and even do things like there are different apps and timers that we can turn things off. So even just the idea of looking at our phones before bed, you could be looking at all the pictures of cute, kittens and pictures of your grandchildren, but you've still got a screen giving off blue light in front of your eyes. So keep in mind the idea that an hour before bed, turn your phone off and turn off notifications and do those things so that you've got a window where you're not in contact, and then moderate what you're doing. Yes, we all want to know what's going on in the world. Give yourselves, a lot. I'm going to have 15 minutes in the morning, set a timer. 15 minutes maybe at lunch, and maybe again in the evening. The way we used to consume news at certain times of day, if you're working, do that. And then again, you mentioned about, we go onto Facebook or we do something and it starts off as a social thing. Again, moderate yourself, because now that it's all tied to one, it's not the same where we used to be able to say, I'm going to go pick up the phone on the wall and I'm going to call my mom, and I know I've got 15 minutes for this phone call, because you do that phone call now and you do 15 other things afterwards on the same device. So a lot of it is really just about working on our self-regulation.
Absolutely. Dr. Tejani, I want to ask you the same question. There are new terms being that are floating around currently. Social media envy, the fear of missing out. It's almost as if we don't go through each piece of news at night before bedtime, read up on all the updates about all the negative impact, all the negative news pieces that are currently around us, be it the Ukraine war, previously the Afghanistan conflict, and before that, of course, the pandemic. We almost feel as though we're missing out on something. So what's the way out of this?
Well, the first thing you have to realize is that the internet and social media is a completely unregulated modality. So, where you have television, for example, in your own countries, in the UK here, we have television stations which are regulated by the government, by other regulatory bodies. The internet is a completely unregulated domain. So it becomes incumbent on the individual to try and regulate their usage of these devices. As you said, with more and more negative news around us, with the COVID pandemic, with the Ukraine war, and other things as well, we usually turn to our mobile phones in order to, you see, at the moment, we are creatures of convenience. We don't want to turn on the news and watch the whole news reel going on for half an hour, for an hour. We just want to pick up our phones and select which pieces of news we want to read about. But that also has a negative implication because we're just consuming negative information all the time. And as my colleague said before, it is really upon us to regulate that consummation of information.
Right. I mean, I'm asking this question as a journalist. I mean, we have to report on all kinds of news. Unfortunately, it's the negative news that gets read more, it gets consumed more. So should we not be looking at these pieces of news before bedtime? Is there any kind of science to tell us that? From what I understand, the war in Ukraine has now sparked the return of this term called doomscrolling. People are more frightened, their future looks more uncertain, and somehow they feel like if they don't read every piece of news at night, they'll miss out.
Well, one of the things about that is the fact that the impact that a piece of news has on us, if you go back, a few decades, think about how we would only get, it would take a day for a story to get somewhere or to end up in a newspaper. Then we got into the 24-hour cycle. That same piece of news, our brain processes the repetition of that story as if, in a sense, it's a new piece of information. So in other words, if it's a negative story, if you read or watch 5 pieces on the same story, your brain takes it as 5 different things. So for example, when we've had everything from a story, maybe it's a local child goes missing, you suddenly have this, yes, it is about one child, but you're hearing it 20 times a day. So your body, in a sense, responds like there are 20 children missing, or in this case, the stories. So that's the other part, is it's okay to keep informed. And we know that things are literally changing by the moment, but in a sense, we are kind of subjecting ourselves to this. I give great credit to the folks that, like yourself, that do this and have to be immersed in this. But again, you develop your own way of compartmentalizing, and that's what the rest of us need to do as well, is to compartmentalize so that we're not re-subjecting ourselves to these things, and to take those breaks. As much as there's fear of missing out, there's also the joy of missing out, in the sense that, again, the world is not going to change. These issues are not going to be resolved if we take a 12-hour break from our social media feed.
Sharon, it's very interesting you say that the joy of missing out you've mentioned right now. That actually brings me to my next question. It seems that a digital detox is the only antidote to the so-called doom scrolling. But is this even possible? Can we completely switch off?
Well, I can tell you from having been in a life in politics where I was basically surgically attached to my phone, that was one of the first things I did, and probably one of the best things. And don't get me wrong, I still have issues with, picking up my phone and like everyone else, when to put it down. But I have to say that was probably one of the best things that I did for my mental health. And the world didn't fall off its axis. It did, I did better for it. I was still informed of events, but I wasn't as immersed. So it's not easy. And I even know of some practitioners, when treating folks for depression, one of the first things they actually get them to do is a digital detox.
Right, absolutely. Same question to you, Dr. Tejani. Can we completely switch off at this point in our lives, given our reliance on smartphones and tablets and other gadgets, to just get through the day?
Absolutely. There's no reason why you cannot switch off from social media. Unfortunately, we as a society are now more reliant than ever on our smartphones, but we all have the option of just switching off our phones or putting on silent, putting in a separate room, and spending more time with our loved ones, spending more time with our families, spending more time with our friends. And actually, that is the best thing you can do for your own mental health.
Right. I also now want to talk about this aspect of mental health. When we were talking about the pandemic, we also came up with a more silent killer, which was depression and anxiety, the impact of the pandemic and subsequent lockdowns on our mental health. And now it seems that we're seeing a spillover of that, and this seems to be a silent pandemic that all of us are going through. What's the way out of this? When we consume news on a daily basis, negative news, what kind of impact does it have on our mental well-being? Is this something that we need to watch out for, especially with our children?
I would say absolutely. And it is one of these, as you say, it's the next phase, because we do want to keep apprised of things. We do want to keep, seeing, okay, where are things going right? Can I go out and go shopping today safely? Can I do this? Can I do that? And it does have an impact, and especially on our kids. We're, as creatures, one of the things that we crave is dopamine, and we crave serotonin, and accessing our phones, especially dopamine. Again, you can get those social media likes, you can do those things, you feel like you're connected. And as my colleague mentioned before, the idea of finding, especially now that we have more opportunities, as much direct human interaction. And I would almost say, too, in terms of how we use our devices, is that, again, it's far more distinct from when there was a phone over here, a television over there, a radio over there, but almost trying to break up our use of our technology into those old school ways. And again, in the same way that it was, my mom told me to step away from the TV or get off the phone with my friends for too long and actually come play a board game. We need to start doing more of those things. So I think the pandemic, in many cases, especially when we've been, stuck in our homes with various family members for long periods of time, can actually afford us the opportunity to build those kinds of social connections. And again, use the phones and the tablets as a tool, but remember, they serve us, we don't serve them. And that while a news cycle is 24 hours and can be convenient, there's no onus upon us to stay connected 24 hours. Know that it's there when you need it. And again, it becomes about how we manage it for ourselves, and especially for our kids who are now having to use it to access school. Keep it as a school thing, keep it as a talking to friends thing, and then come back and spend time with the people around you.
Dr. Tejani, the same question to you. What's the way out of this? Endless scrolling, the impact of it on our mental health. How do we escape this?
Well, I think we have to take responsibility for ourselves as a society, or as a community. Sometimes we can blame others for our own shortcomings. You know, the responsibility of your social media usage is yours, and the responsibility of my social media usage and my smartphone usage is mine. And for our children as well, as my colleague said, it is really important that we instill these values in our children, that actually having 24/7 access to a mobile phone or a smartphone is not always a good thing. And also, you know, we need to quota and ration their usage of these devices.
Okay, at this point, I'd just like to take some final comments from both of you. I'll start with you, Sharon. If you had to give any advice to somebody, a young professional perhaps, who has a habit of switching on their phones every night at 10 p.m. and sort of scrolling through the night before they snooze off, as they say, what would you say to them?
Well, as someone that has struggled with that very habit, recognize that what you're probably engaging is procrastination revenge, the idea of trying to steal some time for yourself, and this is something that you can do before bed. Go, I deserve better than that. I can check the news in the morning with my coffee. If I'm going to do something before bed, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to look at something non-electronic. I'm possibly going to take some time to meditate, reflect. I'd say at the end of the day, the best thing to do, whether it's on a piece of paper, in a journal, write down 3 wonderful things that happened in your day, 3 interactions that you're grateful for, and 3 ways that you felt that you might have made a positive impact in someone's day. And use that as your end of the day routine. You'll sleep better. And you know what? Social media and the news will be there in the morning when you wake up.
Absolutely. Dr. Tejani, your final comments.
I would advise anyone who does suffer from this problem to try and reduce the number of devices that they have in their bedroom. That's what I advise my patients. If you have a television in your bedroom, not a good idea. Mobile phone or smartphone, not a good idea. Get yourself an old-fashioned alarm clock. Set an alarm for the morning when you have to get up for work, and keep all the devices in a separate room. That's my advice to them.
Yes.
Right, absolutely. I'll just like to sum up all these comments in this very insightful discussion, as our guests have told us. I think we should be as disciplined with our social media consumption, our news consumption, especially at night, as we are with any other habit in our daily lives. A digital detox or a digital rest is mandatory at this point for our mental well-being, essentially, which has now become more important than ever, especially after the recent turmoil that we've seen in the last 2 years. And on that note, I'd like to wrap up this discussion. Thank you to both our guests for joining us on WION at this hour.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.